Welcome, IT changemakers, to the DEX Show with Tim Flower and Tom McGraw. Let's get into it.
Hello, changemakers. Welcome back to the DEX Show. I'm joining you from London as ever, but Tim Flower is next to a canal in Copenhagen. Tim, how's it going out there?
Yeah, it's one of the beautiful parts of this job. Definitely not having a digital employee experience right now. I'm having very much a real one. So it's an awesome part of the trip. Had a great meeting with some CIOs yesterday in Copenhagen and off to Amsterdam and London next week. Yeah, really cool.
Super cool. And this is how slick we're getting, listeners, in our fifth year. Who knows what it is? Because Tim's joining us from beside a canal, and he's joining us for a very special guest with everybody's favorite guitar playing, rock climbing, DEX analyst supremo, Andrew Hewitt. How you doing, Andrew?
I'm great. Yeah, I actually really got that bio uploaded to my Forrester.com site. That's great. I appreciate that. That's nice.
You better be everybody's favorite, because I don't think there's too many. There's too many out there with that specific list of accolades. But
Yeah.
I was trying to do the maths, Andrew. I mean, you were our first guest. That's a firm fact in my memory.
Yes.
You were our launch guest, but I don't know how many times we've had you on since. Might be a fourth, something like that.
I think it's either 3 or 4, I would say. I feel like it's at least once a year. So
absolutely.
somewhere in that range.
So it should be. And how are you, Andrew? How are things?
I'm great. I'm in research mode, which is rare for an analyst. Usually you're in consulting and traveling mode. But I've been doing research for the last 3 months, which is super exciting. So I have a bunch of stuff coming out soon. So it's good. It's nice to not be on the road and actually focus on writing and delivering content for clients. So yeah, I'm really good.
Nice. We look forward to it. We always look forward to it. And I got written down here for my first question. I've got written down, let's start at 30,000 feet. And I think that's where I like to picture you, Andrew, with your nails in a cleft of rock. So, based upon, if you're in the sort of writing and composition phase at the moment, I'm sure you've had a lot of conversations with enterprise customers in recent months. And where would you say, based upon these, the center of DEX gravity is presently? What do you think is emerging as the big kind of collective challenge or indeed opportunity that you're hearing about echoed again and again?
Yeah, so if I take a look at our priorities that we've surveyed our digital workplace leaders on, we do this every single year, and we have a new survey coming out in June. But the priorities are very clear. I mean, there are top 5 priorities. First one is end user adoption of technology, which I'm sure we'll jump into. Second one is improving the user experience of those applications. Third is taking advantage of AI. Fourth is proactive IT, very DEX oriented, right? And the fifth is workplace experience. So that whole return to office type of momentum that's going. So overall, what I'm seeing is that prevailing trend of DEX is getting bigger. It's breaking out of its traditional home of end user computing and service desk and starting to address a lot more opportunity. And we're also seeing that manifest across the organizations that we're working with as they're continuing to work outside of IT as well. So the overall prevailing notion is bigger, essentially, for DEX, more holistic. And so it's something we've seen for a number of years, but we're seeing that even accelerating this year.
Why adoption at number one all of a sudden, Andrew? What's your read for the sort of backdrop for that sudden unanimity there?
Yeah, you would think it would be very employee experience focused, but it's actually very cost focused. It's about getting more for less, right? A lot of the IT leaders I speak with today are, making these huge investments in these big productivity suites or these large monolithic enterprise applications. And so they want to get their money back. And the way that you do that is you enable people to get the most out of those applications as possible, right? And so that's a lot of the prevailing notion today is help me get my value for those investments that I've already made. And adoption is absolutely one of the key components of that. The second piece of that, of course, is taking advantage of the potential innovation from these new systems like artificial intelligence, generative AI capabilities as well, which, if you're able to enable the employee, you're going to drive better competitive differentiation in the marketplace, more innovation, higher productivity, hopefully less burnout because you're doing less boring, mundane things on a daily basis because you're automating it. So I think AI is also impacting that adoption conversation, but I would say it's primarily give me more for less.
Yeah, I think I had loads. I know we have loads of questions about adoption, so we better put a pin in some of those thoughts right now. Right?
Yeah, let's do it.
Reel off, right? But look, I think you were talking about DEX getting bigger just a minute ago, and would you say the in terms of maturity, is there a kind of consensus direction, or do you see the sort of market fragmenting presently in terms of focus and maturity both?
So there's consensus in the fact that every organization or software vendor I talk to recognizes the value of DEX. Like, you're going to be flying blind into the future if you don't have some type of real-time telemetry collection that's helping you make decisions with more accuracy, right? Because that's how we previously have operated, especially within energy computing. It's like, we're just guessing about what the problem is and not actually verifying it. So there's consensus there. And so what I'm seeing across the digital workplace is DEX getting embedded into so many different areas. Where I think there's not really a lot of consensus yet is I'm seeing a couple of different, let's call them hubs or camps of digital employee experience. Like, there could be kind of the pure DEX digital workplace, give me the broad holistic view of all the technologies impacting employees. That's definitely one hub. You have endpoint management taking in DEX capabilities. That rise of what we're hearing in the industry as autonomous endpoint management is another kind of camp around DEX. And then you have more of the ITSM-led DEX capabilities as well, driven by a lot of the major ITSM players. And so there's not really a lot of consensus in terms of where that future is going, but I think there is consensus that, yes, there's value in having a data-driven approach to how we manage everything within the digital workplace.
Great. And we're going to delve into a few of these topics, or Tim is with you in a moment. But before we do, I think, look, used to a lot of people, all of us turn into you to know who the DEX leaders are in terms of vendors, right? Mm-hmm. That's the typical thing. But I was curious, right? If you had to describe the DEX leaders of today in terms of like enterprise adopters, what do you see as the telltale signs? What do they tend to be doing differently?
So one is how they're organized, right? A lot of organizations are setting up, what we've called like experience management office, and they start to kind of like have this center of excellence around experience. What I'm finding with the most mature organizations is that they're actually moving away from that dedicated center of excellence model, and they're actually embedding DEX into the product teams itself. So the most mature organizations have kind of decentralized that, where it's actually a culture of experience that's expected across all of the product teams. And it's not necessarily just kind of one center that's driving everything, forward. So that's been a shift that I've seen with some of our more mature DEX, customers over the last year or so, is that they start to build this culture of experience where you don't need to have someone kind of be the enforcer of DEX, if you will. So that's one sign that someone is more mature. I would also say that they move beyond thinking about specific tech silos. Like a mature DEX customer is not going to just focus on what's my device performance or what's my Microsoft 365 health, et cetera. They're going to be thinking about the employee journey. Like, what is that employee trying to accomplish when they're using multiple different technologies at once? And how do I start to measure that? And so I have a lot of customers today that are doing like design thinking, employee journey mapping workshops. And it's with that goal of really understanding what are the various elements that impact that experience that may come from multiple different technologies. And so that's a much more sophisticated way to approach some of the more process-oriented issues with digital experience than, say, just focus on specific silos. And then the final area is that you absolutely start to see collaboration outside of IT in the most mature customers. So you're going to see HR involved, facilities, sometimes security is involved. So that's a major transition that we've seen amongst the mature customers as well.
So that maps right in, Andrew. We had a conversation yesterday with some senior leaders here in Copenhagen with a great partner of ours, Atea, CIO level and maybe CIO -1. And it was fascinating to hear the conversation, it was a couple hours, the conversation around digital employee experience, using that acronym of DEX and not talking about a platform, a product, a solution at all.
Yeah.
It was all around how are my employees experiencing, primarily in the world of AI, how are they experiencing ChatGPT? How can we leverage that technology to help their experience versus making it a burden to try to learn it? It was really interesting to hear the conversation. I spoke for about an hour, more of a conversation on how to solve some of those problems. But you've tracked that evolution of DEX for a while. Is the definition changing? Tom touched on it a little bit in terms of fragmenting or consolidating. But when we talked about the definition of DEX, it was very much outside the normal boundaries that we do. I'm curious if you see it broadening or narrowing or becoming something else. What are people talking to you about?
Yeah, it's super interesting. I mean, the majority of DEX conversations that I get today are at that strategic level. Sounds very similar to the conversations you're having, which is, hey, like there are so many aspects of DEX that impact the end user experience, and they're not just end user computing. Like I have one client today where they're like, DEX from an end user computing perspective doesn't really matter to us because we way overspec the devices. They're going to be running for 5 or 6 years. Like that's not our problem. Our problem is around like the processes that we have in place that are frankly a total pain to navigate as an employee. And so that definition, the original definition that I had for DEX a number of years ago, was the sum of perceptions employees have working with the technology they use daily. So it's that idea that it's not necessarily the tech that matters, it's what you feel about the tech and how it impacts your day-to-day work. That's really what matters from an employee perspective. And so, I would venture to say that maybe I was a little bit premature in terms of that definition about 5 years ago when DEX was really, it was just about that whole like new data collection mechanism. And so what I'm starting to see now is I think the market is starting to see that it's a broader conversation than just how do I impact digital workplace. And that's why we're seeing a lot of these other leaders like HR leaders getting involved as well. So the definition, I would say, has remained the same, but I think that the market has now got to the point where they're able to address this more holistic picture of DEX in a way that they just couldn't before.
And interestingly enough, that was the other half of the conversation, was the partnership between HR and IT, the business and IT, and not just looking at it as kind of collaborative partners, but getting more connected in the delivery of an experience. We talk a lot about, and Tom touched on this earlier, and we want to kind of go a little bit deeper in it. I think Pedro was really ahead of his time 20 years ago and continues to be ahead of his time every year that NextThink marches forward, including last year, the purchase of AppLearn and being able to now write a product in our platform called Adopt. And that adoption of technology was absolutely top of mind with the executives yesterday. I'm curious, and you touched on it too, the digital adoption piece, is it finally being recognized as a core pillar of DEX? Are we truly ahead of our time? Or do you still see it as just a downstream training problem and a number of different platforms might be able to solve it?
Well, I would say a couple of things. First, I'll reiterate it's the number one priority from digital workplace leaders that we survey against. That's the one that they say, this is our most important thing over the next 12 months. So there's recognition that adoption is super important. And when I work with a lot of these DEX teams today or digital workplace teams, they will often have like a dedicated DEX tool in the traditional sense, like a NextThink, but they'll also have a DAP tool. And I see that very consistently, where they have kind of these two separate tools that they use to deal with this overall issue. And so I think it's there's much better recognition amongst IT that you need to have something that looks at overall adoption. I don't think it's a downstream training component anymore. That being said, it's still really early in terms of the convergence of those two, right? I think we'll start to see more of that happen over the next couple of years. But there's not a ton of examples, as you know, of DEX and DAP kind of coming together, in the enterprise today. Although those tools often exist in the portfolio that workplace leaders have.
You're saying a lot.
I was going to just jump in, Tim, but maybe
go ahead, Tom.
if I may. I was going to say, Andrew, I mean, thinking about that, you've got these two tools often found side by side. what advantages could you anticipate in those two tools being one tool and those two functions coming much closer together?
Well, I think there's a lot of value in being able to unify the measurement of all of those capabilities in a single, dashboard or like a single place, right? Ultimately, you as a DEX team, I don't really want to go out and have 5 to 10 different ways that I'm measuring the experience. I want to have kind of a consistent way of doing that, and that's what we've seen at the large enterprise level so far. Most of the customers I'm working with, if they're moving towards a more holistic DEX strategy, they're saying, hey, take the data out of the DEX tool or out of the DAP tool or out of ITSM, host it in a backend database, and then manage it that way. So I have that visibility across there, right? So they're effectively creating a platform strategy. And I think as you start to bring together DEX and DAP and maybe other areas as well, you are kind of creating, forcing that that platform strategy. And I think that's the big future of this space, is that we're going to see a lot more consolidation so that people have that unified view. So yeah, I think there's absolutely a benefit of bringing those two together. And of course, being able to draw connections between the two. Like if I see within a DEX tool that an application is not performing, correctly, but I can also see that the user is using it in some strange way, maybe I can draw a connection there and offer an opportunity for learning or remediation of some sort. So I could definitely see some overlap in terms of the capabilities themselves beyond just, how do I visualize the data?
So a lot of leaders are talking to you about the fact that this is top on their list. You talk with lots of enterprises, some more mature than others. Do you see the customers that the enterprises that you know of that are mature? Are you seeing signs of a design or an approach or a process that they've actually solved and can set the path for others, or is it very much up in the air now? You talked about maybe DEX, what I would feel is fragmented and going to different teams versus being centralized. Mm-hmm. Are you seeing anything come together and gel around adoption and performance and stability come together that somebody has solved and can set the way?
I have not seen it, formally. There's definitely been a couple of examples of companies managing those two tool sets and using them to kind of benchmark that experience. But in terms of like integrating the data together, I haven't seen that at a large enterprise yet. What I would say is driving a lot of this interest, though, is the evolving conversation around XLAs. That seems to be an area where organizations are saying, hey, I need the visibility from DAP. I need the visibility from DEX. I need the visibility from my HR tools to be able to construct an employee journey focused XLA. In other words, I look at, the classic ones, obviously like onboarding, right? That's going to have multiple different components in it. And they may say, hey, I want to be able to construct this XLA of onboarding using insights from all of those. And so I think that's going to be a forcing function for what drives a lot of this integration together over time as people get more focused on these journey-led XLAs as opposed to like just measuring like boot up time or login or application health, those types of things. I think that's where you're going to start to see more of that formal approach of bringing those two capabilities together.
You touched upon it a little bit earlier, Andrew, that one of the reasons that adoption maybe finds itself at that number one spot again and again is, I guess, what you might describe as the imminent wave of AI-driven digital transformation, to pluck a phrase out of here. And I'm really interested in your read of that dynamic between adoption investment, adoption kind of focus, and what people are anticipating over the next few years from AI, and what you think that process looks like and what they think that process is going to look like.
Yeah. So first of all, the thing that I always recommend with adoption is you got to really understand the conditions in which you're trying to drive adoption, right? If you're working in an environment where the employee experience is poor, where people are already burnt out, you definitely do not have the credibility to go in there and drive adoption, because people are not going to adopt tools when they're already too exhausted. That's one of the major components of this as an organization. And what we also see with more mature organizations is they create that space to drive that adoption and allow people to have that time to learn and take on new capabilities. And so that's often the thing that gets missed with the less mature organizations. They don't have a concept of employee engagement and what they're dealing with in terms of constraints from the workforce as they try to drive, adoption of a new solution. So that's been one of the challenges with AI is like everybody knows I got to take advantage of AI. Someone that knows how to use better AI than me is probably going to replace me if I don't learn to use this, but I don't really have the time. And so a lot of the focus has been, on giving people that space, giving them the right training and resources to be able to go and experiment with these new, AI capabilities. It's a massive change, for folks. And so I'm finding, with our enterprise organizations that they're having to spend a lot more time on employee enablement with these generative AI solutions than they thought, right? It's not as easy as just hitting a key on your PC and have it bring up your generative AI system, right? It's about how do you do the prompt engineering? How do you develop the right use cases? All of that. How do you ensure compliance? All of that. So it's a tough challenge, but it's something that I think a lot of IT leaders for the first time are really seeing a huge potential in what types of innovation you can drive if you're able to really unlock that adoption of those AI capabilities.
And do you think it's like, I mean, if you contrast it with previous waves of digital transformation, right? It hits a little different as well, doesn't it? Because I think, adopting to something like Teams or whatnot is a little different to a technology that's not only transformational for how you communicate or function internally, but your survival inside your own industry, collectively. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, and does that dynamic elevate IT and elevate the process of adoption to something that's much more strategically essential than has previously been the case?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we often talk about this concept of, you're really trying to harness intelligence at scale with AI, which is a way of saying that like these capabilities are learning over time. You're teaching it, you're training, it's constantly changing, right? And I think that's one of the major differences with AI versus, let's say, Microsoft Teams or like the initial era of mobile adoption, right? It was like this very defined, discrete thing. You learned how to deposit a check with your mobile app on your phone. It was great. Then you moved on, right?
Yeah.
With AI, it's going to be constantly changing. It's going to be learning about you. And as it gets more sophisticated, your ability to interact with that is going to get more sophisticated as well. So I think that's a really, interesting component of adoption here in the sense that like the floor is like shifting beneath you. It's like quicksand beneath your feet. You're always trying to keep up with it versus just, dealing with that one time of learning something and then having to, move on and not really having to touch it again for years.
Your business isn't going to be a bit less efficient if you fail to adopt. It's going to be a lot less competitive, as is one way of maybe putting it, right? And another interesting thing is speak to kind of customers and enterprises, who are very forward thinking in this way. Myself also, and is there's a kind of a theme that I would describe as using AI to adapt and adopt to AI. Do you know what I mean? AI is becoming a catalyst for its own AI transformation, and I wonder if that's something you're picking up on and encountering. The level of nuance you're describing requires, or at least really benefits from AI technology also.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we see this, to kind of narrow the DEX focus a little bit. If you think about DEX in the context of like endpoint management, oftentimes people will say, okay, AI is going to be automating all these endpoint management tasks. I don't really necessarily want that. And so I'm not going to invest in it. I'm too scared. I don't want to relinquish the control there as well. But I think to your point, what you can also use AI to do is to stop those automations from happening and actually bring you into the loop. And so it can go both ways. You can use AI to go out and automate certain things in your endpoint management stack, but you can also use it as a guide to be able to bring you in to give you more of that human in the loop experience. And so in a way, you can kind of use AI to safeguard against the pitfalls of AI as well. And so I think that's something that's often overlooked, is that you can use it in that way to reduce some of the risks. And so that's one of the major conversations that we're seeing. We think about DEX in the context of that endpoint management stack and how do I do better management at scale? that's definitely one of the key considerations of how do I keep that human in the loop without introducing undue risk into the environment.
And this actually came up yesterday as well. It's interesting, the themes are so close to overlapping, but you've been really focused and vocal, as have we, about the cross-functional nature of DEX ownership.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of concepts that float around: the chief experience officer, the experience operations center, similar to a security operations center or network ops center. But the chief experience officer, CXO, do we feel that that's something that's going to be the catalyst to consolidate things and really formalize the focus on cross-functional experience? Or do you think we're still moving in a decentralized model, that things are still too fragmented?
Well, so I think in general, like you want to move. Eventually, the end goal is to have this culture of experience where it is decentralized. You have all the product owners that say, "Hey, like DEX is part of 20% of my goal. I got to make sure that that's a big focus of mine, moving in that right direction." But to create that, it often needs that first step of the high C-level executive that can kind of enforce that. And I think that's why you see the rise of the XMO, and then in some cases the CXO. Now, what's interesting is I've heard a couple of executives that are like chief DEX officers or chief experience officers. It's really not super common today, but I have had a couple of organizations move in that direction. Where it tends to move in that direction of there's a leading CXO is that person's often coming from like a customer experience perspective, and then they're realizing that, hey, employee experience has an impact on customer experience. DEX impacts the employee experience, and therefore I need to focus on that too. And so when I've seen a CXO come into a DEX initiative, they're often coming from a customer experience perspective, and they're often a little bit blind to some of the issues that IT could help with, and help them prioritize. And so I think that executive is going to be more common, but it's likely not going to come directly from the CIO. I think it's going to come from another part of the business, and that person is going to have to upscale and really rely on the digital workplace organization to help them kind of understand the components of DEX specifically. So yes, I think there is movement in that direction. I would say it's not very common. But the ultimate goal, again, is that transformation where that DEX culture is just embedded across the whole organization. But you're absolutely right. I mean, you need that executive level sponsorship in order to drive that level of acceptance.
And over the years, my observation anyway has been that there isn't a real strong connection between IT and HR. I don't know if I would call it conflict or even go so far as a turf war per se. But do you see any genuine collaboration models emerging other than just a general committee style governance?
Yeah, I've started to see, some IT organizations reporting into HR. I've seen that a couple of different times where, your senior vice president of digital workplace reports up to the CPO. And so that's I think an example of a more mature organization where they're going to have that executive level approval, and they're going to have more formalized roadmaps working together, where you're really treating that DEX as an overall product that you're managing over time, right? So it's been very uncommon. I think the prevailing notion is that there is still a bit of a turf war. HR feels like they own the experience, but it's often from an employee lifecycle perspective of hire to fire. IT feels like they own kind of the daily productivity experience, but they don't really have insight into like human capital management and those types of tools. So right now, there's still a bit of challenge out there. I would say for folks listening in, it's like, what can you give to that HR person? What type of insight do they need that you can uniquely provide, and use that as a lever in your partnership to build that relationship, better. And over time, I think you start to see, more convergence or collapse of those organizations in the context specifically of DEX.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. The notion of IT reporting to HR. I wouldn't suggest symbolic organizational changes, but that one could be significant. In my prior role at the Hartford, for a long time, IT reported into finance, and there
Yeah,
couldn't have been a stronger message that
that's a
that
cost
IT
center.
was an expense, is a cost center,
Yeah.
and reporting into the CFO. But it sends an equally strong message if IT reports into HR. I think that's a very fascinating evolution
Yep.
of an IT org chart. Um, yeah, I think it's. I wouldn't be surprised to see that.
Got to add. We did a recent survey of over 1,000 IT leaders. We asked them what their expectations were for dynamic between the departments in the next 3 to 5 years. 60-something% of
Mm.
respondents told us they thought they would merge inside 5 years, HR and
Mm,
IT. So
that's
strong
interesting. Yeah.
expectations there.
Yeah, when we ask our surveys of digital employee experience teams, like what do you do on a daily basis? Like what are your key activities? The number one area is they collaborate with people outside of IT. So it's starting, but it's going to take some time.
And there's a notion that IT is going to be the HR of AI. The digital employees need HR just like the
Love
human
that
ones do. So
phrase.
Right.
there's all kinds of synergy. The next 5 years are going to be
They're
fascinating.
gonna AI is blatantly gonna have like feelings soon, isn't it?
Right.
It's gonna be like I feel really neglected by my
Yep.
users, and I feel really unappreciated. And
Yeah, exactly.
IT's gonna have to be like, okay, we're gonna send you on a management course, and it's gonna be all sorts. So,
My last question, while the tour boat goes by on the canal, I'll give you the
it's very
folks on
scenic.
my.
You're on the DEX
um,
show.
yeah. What do you see? And I get outside the IT piece, and Tom kind of touched on it too. Is what about the emotional intelligence that's required here, or even deeper? You talked about design thinking. What about the neuroscience informed design? The next evolution of DEX being informed by some scientific methods, especially as we start to understand the toll of the cognitive overload that employees are under and the fractioned attention. Where
Yep.
do you see that emotional intelligence coming into play and everything?
Oh, if someone can crack that, they will have the best digital experience.
Right.
That's really kind of like the holy grail of all of this, right? If you can get to a cognitive, informed approach on DEX, then you're doing way better than anybody else in the space, right? So the the opportunity is certainly there. I mean, I spoke with a DEX leader just about a year ago for a piece of research, and she told me I'm literally going out to try to hire a neuroscientist that can help out my team in terms of understanding the cognitive impact of technology on performance, on my ability to achieve flow states, on removing distraction, right? Like that whole component is super interesting, and I think provides a huge opportunity for folks, right? Just understanding, this is what I usually tell IT leaders, like just give yourself a primer on some of the neuroscience in this space and some of the organizational psychology. It's going to go a really long way if you can understand that, hey, people are most successful when they're able to focus for long periods of time. The max of that is about 3 to 4 hours before they need a break. And so I need to really design that environment with that in mind. I need to create those conditions of flow. And ultimately, that's what DEX helps to create. Is it reduces all those distractions, things crashing, whatever, the things that take you out of that flow state. Ultimately, what we see is those that can stay in that state are much more likely to be successful over the long term. They're much more likely to drive competitive differentiation. And so it's one of the key areas that companies absolutely overlook, and they really should not, especially when it's becoming more and more difficult to differentiate year after year after year.
Absolutely. And year after year after year, Andrew, we have you on the show. It,
Good
it's a
segue.
pleasure.
That's great.
It's a delight. And look, I just want to give you some kudos. Last time around, as I recall, we asked you to make a prediction, a bold or controversial prediction for the DEX space. Actually, I don't think we phrased it like that. A prediction for the DEX space. And you made a very good one. I think it was about acquisitions. And I won't say any further about. I won't be any more concrete than that. Okay, but you did nail it. I think it's fair to say. So this time around, relatively early in 2025, what's your bold or controversial prediction this year?
For this year, I have one for like 5 years from now, but
okay, you can do that. You can do that.
Okay,
No,
I'll do
that's
the 5 year.
absolutely fine. It's going to be harder to hold you to account or give you
This
your
is true.
credit, but you can still do it. You can go.
I'll take the kudos for the acquisition prediction last year. That's good.
Yeah.
So I think 5 years out from now, I don't think you see any distinction in the DEX market. In other words, I think it becomes this broader platform-based approach. So we don't have this like specific, DEX market specifically. I think what ends up happening is that all these areas of digital workplace end up taking on DEX components over time, right? And having that data-driven approach. So it's not so much there's a collapse of the DEX market overall, but there is a distribution of DEX capabilities across every aspect of the digital workplace. And you don't have like this discrete capability where it's like, I need to go buy a DEX tool. It's, I have DEX capabilities across everything that I have as an organization. So I think that is something that we're starting to see happen. And I would expect that to be true by 2030.
Yeah, bringing us back to that kind of merger expectation around, because what you describes a kind of an organic merger between HR and IT functionalities as we've historically understood them, right? Distinctly. Well, so lovely to have you back on the show, Andrew. Genuine pleasure. And that was a great convo. Awesome. Let's have appearance number 5 in about 12 months or whatever it is. Yeah.
Perfect. Sounds good. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure as always.
Good stuff, Andrew. Thank you.
Alrighty.
And thank you, Copenhagen.
Yes.
Nice.
Nice. I like
that. Yeah, look at that. That's great fun. Very fun.
To make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to leave a rating of the show. Just tap the number of stars you think the podcast deserves. If you'd like to learn more about how NextThink can help you improve your digital employee experience, head over to nextthink.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.